What's up guys, welcome back to Cross World TCG, and today we're going to be covering the top 24 breakdown from the St. Louis regionals that happened over this previous weekend. Now despite Yellow-Blue Hirudegarn's massive showing at the previous weekend, SS3 Goku actually was the most represented deck inside of top 24, followed by Hirudegarn. There was a couple Trunks lists, a couple Android lists playing Cell Chain, which made it into the top cut. Interestingly, a Mecha Frieza with Veggies made it in, as well as an Explosive Power Vegeta playing the yellow lineup. In terms of the color breakdown for this weekend, it was pretty close between Yellow-Blue and Red-Blue, Yellow-Blue having 8 and Red-Blue having 7 decks, followed behind by 4 mono-blue variants, a couple green-blue, a couple mono-green, and of course the one green-red-yellow for that Mecha Veggie list. Now I think it's kind of surprising that we didn't see as much Yellow-Blue as I personally thought we would, as Red-Blue managed to take back a large chunk of the top cut, and it was good to see Mono-Blue make a showing again. Moving on to the deck lists, our winner list was surprisingly the only Yellow-Blue SS3 list that made it into top cut. Now this guy's list looks like it was teched out to do well against the mirror match, playing 4 copies of Nimbus, 2 Roshi, 4 Unbreakable, and 4 Beam. I imagine he wanted to drag out games a little bit longer to reach that turn 3 threshold. And then moving on to our second place, we actually had an SS3 Red-Blue. This Red-Blue list looks similar to other lists that we've seen win events in the past. However, he opted to play a stronger defensive package to be able to actually force the game into the mid game. Moving on to our third place list, we have a Red-Blue Trunks. His list looks pretty solid overall. He opted to play the ability leashed Gohans over the burst attack Gohans. Probably because of his leader, he would have more cards in his hand, so he opted for that instead, as well as the inclusion of that Supreme Kai of Time from the tournament pack. Moving on to our fourth place list, we have another SS3 Red-Blue, again with a very thick defensive lineup. However, this list looks a little more standard to what we were seeing a couple weeks back with the Keflas included in it. Moving on into some of the other lists that managed to make their way into top 24, we have 2 Android 17 lists featuring Cell Chain. One managed to make it into top 8, and one managed to make it into top 16. The top 8 list is actually very interesting. He opted to play 4 of the free blocker Krillin, as well as Vile Replication Cell from the Ultimate box. He also only opted to play 1 copy of the Android 16. I'm guessing that he's been spurned before and opted to go for the draw super combo instead of the discard one. He's also not playing any copies of the 1-drop Zero, which is probably why these numbers are changed up a little bit. And the other Android list opted to play a thick negate count, which makes sense with all of the 1-drops and 2-drops running around. Speedy Surprise Attack is actually a very potent negate which can completely shut off your opponent's turn, as well as the fact that we know full power energy is already very good against those aggressive decks. Continuing on, we had a very interesting Hirudegarn list that managed to make it into top 16 as well. This guy decided to play a green-blue Hirudegarn list featuring the Piccolo that limits your opponent's hand size. Now this looks like a very interesting list, and I'm curious to see some of the matches that he had, because honestly looking at it, I'm not super sure what the general game plan is, but an interesting list nonetheless. Moving on to a little bit more of a standard Hirudegarn list, we have a blue-yellow Hirudegarn list, which looks very similar to the list that won LA during the previous weekend. It looks like this guy thought he was going to play against decks that were thick on negates, so he opted to play 2 Battering in the main. He also opted to play a couple Draco, which is very good against the aggressive decks when they all-in push against you. Moving on, we have our lone Mecha Veggie list. Now this deck is really cool. You definitely can tell he caught people sleeping on Shugesh super hard, and with the large amount of negates that this deck has access to for free, it just goes to show you that the Veggie package still has a lot of potential moving forward. This list actually looks very similar to the one that we featured on our channel a few weeks back, except with a larger negate count to combat the current meta. Moving on to some of the SS3 builds that we saw in Top Cut, there was a single blue-green SS3, very standard looking list. Looks like he opted to play 4 of all the good cards. Interesting choice was the Gohan from the structure deck, and the lack of the King Vegeta surprise attack. I'm guessing this person had played it before and decided it wasn't as necessary because they figured the metagame would be going faster. So by the time you're able to even drop your 4-drop, you should be in a winning position, where early game that King Vegeta surprise attack is just not as good. Continuing on, we have a couple mono blue SS3 lists. This particular one opted to play the Piccolo, the Strategist, as well as Dragon Fist in the main, as well as a 2-2 split between Sidra and Tapion, and a 2-2 split between Piccolo and Kibito Kai. Now this is a very interesting list that looks like it's been teched out to play against the yellow matchups, with that peel off the group leader, turning off swap, and then just focusing on the protect the castle style of Vegito. Moving on, we actually have another triple flash SS3 list that managed to make it into top cut. Looks a little different from the list we featured on the last breakdown. This guy opted for a little bit heavier of a blue package, which makes sense because it gives you access to Bean, which can help immensely against the blue-yellow matchup. And overall, this deck looks like it's more negate heavy to force games into the mid to late game where triple flash can really thrive against the decks that are trying to self-awaken themselves down to like 1 or 2 lives. Moving on, and surprisingly enough, we only had one blue-yellow Trunks represented in top 24. This list looks very similar to the winner of the previous regionals deck list, except with the leader swapped out, so instead of Hirudegarn, it's Trunks. Interestingly, though, Singleton Roshi, I wonder how often that came up versus just the additional copy of Nimbus. And then moving on to the last deck that we're going to feature here, we have one Explosive Power Vegeta with the Energy Lock. This list looks very similar to most of the other blue-yellow lists that we've seen before. I imagine that this is a nightmare for any SS3 list to really play against, and it looks like he learned a lot from the finals of the previous regional because he's opting to play a huge amount of negates as well as Jocos. Overall, that's probably a good decision for this format to be trying to max out at around 8 negates, if not more. And that's it for all the lists that we're going to be featuring here today. I will link where I got these from down below in the description. However, I think it's really cool that we're seeing a lot more deck diversity in this format than we were previously, where it was just red, blue, SS3, and that was it, and then it shifted to just blue, yellow. So a lot of players are coming out, trying new things, innovating on their decks, and trying to figure out ways to play around these crazy fast Storm decks. Overall, I think it's going to be very interesting where this format shapes up and how these decks will be represented in the next event. But thank you guys so much for watching. This has been Logan here with Cross World TCG. We're going to be keeping you up to date on the coverage of these events as best we can, and I hope to see you guys here next time.